right, so coming up next. Oh, you want to do it? You want to introduce me? Oh, that'd be so nice.
Next up is Ben.
Oh, hey, everyone. Hey. So you may have thought that that wasn't what was going to happen, but I am filling in last minute here, and I'm just going to pull it up and get it going. And Joe Hallisey is going to be joining me on the stage last minute, roped him in. So welcome, Joe. All right, so while I'm getting this pulled up, or at least attempting to get this pulled up in some way or fashion, Joe, how'd you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. Probably seen you around already, long time, no see. My name is Joe Hallisey from Zuri Group, and I am filling in with Ben here.
And for those of you that may not know me, my name is Ben Childers. I'm the VP of Global Client Success at Engaging Networks. And today we're going to be launching off from what Hannah, there we go. Thank you. What Hannah and Chris just covered and talking more about testing, and in particular, testing on a budget. So we are not from the Conservation Law Foundation, but Cindy put together this amazing presentation. So we thought we'd just do it for you and try and do the best job that we can. All right, so Joe, what is A/B testing at its most easily definable piece?
Taking one version of something and trying to see if you could beat the results of that thing with a totally different version of it.
And I think one of the things that sometimes gets missed is a lot of people just kind of start chucking things, and there's no hypothesis that was ever designed, right? You have to design a hypothesis test. I know it seems really nerdy, but there's a reason that you design that, right? Because you need to know statistically, was it significant? Does it have any actual variance on what we're trying to do? And importantly, let's say we thought that we were going to increase a click-through rate, and we ended up increasing an open rate. Well, how does that test actually play out? Well, that wasn't what we were trying to test, it's what we saw, so how can we end up actually using it at the end of the day? All right, so the big thing that they did at Conservation Law Foundation is they made an internal shift to create a culture of testing. And so importantly, how they did this is they took an approach of both a top-down and a bottom-up when it came to changing culture internally. I think if you talk to most people, you would find from a change management perspective, Joe, that's really what you want to do in an ideal setting, right?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges when setting up a culture of testing is making sure everyone is on the same page with what you're trying to test and what that hypothesis is. Once you can get that down in your organization, you're at a pretty good starting point for building up this culture.
Yeah, and importantly, by establishing a culture of testing and not just like, oh yeah, there are some people over there that do some testing, it allows you to move that testing structure into all sorts of places. So most of you here are probably marketers or on the fundraising team, maybe do some advocacy. But really, your entire organization, if you make this cultural change, can start doing testing. Your finance team can start doing testing. HR can start doing testing. So across the board, you really want to start thinking about, if we really are adopting this brand new culture of testing, right, what can that allow us to do and what can that allow us to open up? Because a lot of times what happens, and that's what this HIPPO problem, which is highest income person's opinion, personal opinion, highest paid person's opinion, is what that stands for. That was a new thing to me. And it's a fallacy that generally what happens is the highest paid person in the room, they state something, whatever that something is. You know it's wrong, but they are the highest paid person in the room. Establishing a culture of testing can help break down the ability of people to know, oh, we are actually in a culture of testing. We have built safety and trust amongst our teams. So a senior VP says, hey, I think the picture with the little girl is gonna do the best. Your response to that can be, let's test that. And by establishing that culture of tests, establishing a situation where people feel like they have a culture of testing that is happening, it allows you to acknowledge that person, because you probably need to acknowledge them in some capacity, right? But you can also make sure that their false assumptions aren't gonna lead you down the wrong way.
I think one of the things that Ben said just very briefly is he said you want to establish a basis of trust with your team. And one of the things that I've seen that has been a real blocker to testing is getting into these meetings and everyone having to say things like, this is a safe space, like, don't shoot me down for my ideas. Once you can get that level of trust with your organization where it's okay to share these ideas without the hippo person slapping you down or someone saying, we tested that 5 years ago and it didn't work, then you can get back to a better system of testing. So that's definitely a change, an organizational change, a cultural change. But I would recommend everyone think about that and how you're approaching the topic of testing and working within your teams to create that environment that's open to ideas.
And that really kind of talks about the second point that Sydney wanted to make in her presentation, is it allows you to counteract assumptions and biases, right? We all know that we're going into most of our engagements with our own built-up sense of assumptions, who we are, what we did, and where we've gone through, right? And what that's going to do, so for me, I'm an older millennial, I think emojis are really stupid, right? But we know from what we just saw that emojis do well, depending on your audience, right? If I had maybe AARP here, I may not be pushing them to say, hey, emojis all the time. That might not work with our audience, right? Versus if I had someone that really focuses on like Gen Z, I also might not have them do emojis because I don't know how Gen Z feels about emojis today, right? But those are the type of places where you want to be able to know who your audience is and what you're testing so you can counteract your assumptions and biases. And what it does is allows you to see, oh, do these different metrics work for whatever audience we may be trying to target at that particular time?
And this would be a perfect time to talk to your colleagues and say, hey, Ben, I don't know if that's actually correct that that older generations don't like emojis. My mother, who's in her 70s, puts one in every single text she sends me. So let's test that out, don't you think?
Exactly, right? And it puts you in a much better position, right? You're using data. And again, we're starting with a hypothesis. The hypothesis is our older segment of donors aren't going to like emojis. Well, let's test that. Let's test and see what happens from our click-through, our conversion, our open rates from including that. And the important thing is you want to say, this is our testing length. These are our testing parameters. Here is our methodology. So far, none of these things that we're talking about cost a lot of money. They cost some time, right? But they don't cost money to actually get these things done, because that was the big thing that Sydney wanted to hit, is that a lot of this is things that you can do on a budget right now. You can come in and start establishing a culture of trust. You can start outlining these ways that you're going to see, oh, are we actually talking to the people in the way that we talked about? All right, so there's Sydney, who is not here. And then they hired Sid. And Sid and Sydney were the ones that really kind of laid out their testing journey. And what they did is they started with the two of them, and they worked from the middle up and the middle down to really establish that culture of testing. Sadly, and this is in the notes, I swear it's in the notes, they were on Luminate, and then they got happy because they moved to Engaging Networks. I swear, these are her slides. These are definitely not mine, right? So, all right, so then where they really needed to understand is, what were we questioning ourselves? What information were they missing, right? What did they need to establish as a baseline in order to actually do the testing that they wanted to do? And so once they have decided that they wanted to actually do that A/B testing, they wanted to set some initial small goals to just start to get things going. So you can run all sorts of A/B tests. And so Joe, if you're thinking about some of those initial A/B tests on a budget that a nonprofit might want to do, what are some of those low-hanging fruit that don't cost a lot of money to deploy that someone may want to look at?
An easy one is you could try the color of your donate buttons, or the emotion related to an image in your email. So are you sending an email with a happy kid or a sad kid?
One of the ones that I like is I like moving around information on the screen ever so slightly, because there are things that visually it's very easy to go to a VP and say, hey, look, like we made I think anything in the visual realm is very easy to tell. And that's one of those places where you can start combating some of those like biases and assumptions, like, oh yes, we had the picture of the little girl who's over on the right-hand side and that did well for us. Now, if you tested that, I don't know, more than 6, 8, 9 months ago, right, it may be out of date. And that's one of those places where if you're really thinking about those main landing pages, those main places that you're engaging with new people, that's where you have the most richness and where you're going to get the most bang for your buck by making some of those micro changes over time. And again, having a list of all the different things that you may want to do can put you in a spot where you can actually start to approach some of those. All right, So this is what their initial setup was for getting organized. So you can see that, and I think, Joe, this is where you came in? Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yes, that's why Joe is up here, because Joe was literally in the notes from Sydney to me. And so I asked Joe to come up here so we could talk about this getting organized section that you helped them kind of think about.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that I've always had with testing is how are you going to keep your backlog, your ideas list, and how are you going to keep your results? If you don't keep track of this, then when someone says, hey, I think we tested that 5 years ago, like, nobody's going to know what that is. But having a single source of truth for all your testing across platforms is incredibly helpful. So I can't remember which platform this is. I think it might be Airtable, but the other platform that I recommend for a no-cost or a low-cost solution is Trello. Really great for doing some very quick organizing, and you can color code just like this for the different types of platforms or types of tests, and keep things organized.
And I think the thing that I really like about this, Trello, there are other platforms, but this also just looks like a Google Sheets, right? So you don't have to go out and buy a new piece of technology to make this work, right? We'd have test name, status, we have where we put it in the funnel, we have the pieces of information that were important to them. You can see that they early on made some determinations in terms of how they were going to tag and label. I think a lot of that base work can make your life a lot easier moving forward. Is that right, Joe?
Yeah, and you don't have to get so complex straight off the board. For your backlog, start out with what your hypothesis is and try to make it as easy as possible. Say, I think that our donations will get more conversions if they are single step versus multi-step or something like that. And then go on from there and make sure you record your dates that you started, who made the change, and what the date that you're hoping to look at the outcome is. So you don't have to go fancy. Just try to at least log the basics of what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think what that will allow you to do is to have this repository that you can continually refer back to and see what haven't we done recently, right? Have we looked at a button color? Have we looked at a button placement? Have we looked at a gift ask array adjustment of a mix-up of, yeah, that's right, I was at that conference at one time and someone told me I should start with my highest number on the left-hand side because that's actually gonna anchor them to a higher gift amount. Did we ever actually try that? Did we deploy that, right? It's hard to remember all those little tests you're doing, especially as it expands out more and more into your organization and touches more people, right? You don't have one person who might be in control of all of that. So you wanna have a way that you can have this repository of information that you can tap into, which again, can just be a Google Sheet. You could probably run a Google Sheet for 5 or 6 years as an organization, and that would work well for you, right? You can get a lot more out of potentially, higher level pieces of technology. That Google Sheet is gonna do a lot of heavy lifting for you. All right, so this is what most people like. They have results for us to share, which is lovely. All right, so one of the first things that they tested was pre-selecting the monthly give button, so a reoccurring gift being the default. I think as a technology partner, we definitely encourage folks to have that be the pre-selected thing that when people come onto the page, the first thing they're seeing is recurring. We also encourage you to make it very obvious that someone is seeing a recurring gift. I think a lot of you probably heard some of the kind of fallout that happened from the 2020 campaign where people didn't realize they were signing up for recurring gifts because it wasn't very obvious. If someone is signing up for a recurring gift, they should know they're signing up for it. You should want them to be excited that they're signing up for it. You should be communicating with them that they're a recurring gift donor. They are some of your best donors out there. I know a lot of people are scared of their recurring gift donors. I promise you, they're not scary. They want to be involved in what you're doing. And I think that starts with a really positive message when they're signing up and why they're signing up for those things. So you can see they had a 34% increase in money raised, and they had a 67% increase in new monthly giving transactions. And that's one change, right? All they did inside Engaging Networks is they just said, oh, default to recurring, right? That's a 3-minute change in the platform, right? I think they tested it for, I think something like 4 to 8 weeks. I think they saw really good results like 2 or 3 weeks in, but again, they had set up in their methodology, this is a 6 to 8 week test, right? You wanna give it time. You wanna make sure like, oh wait, Arbor Day did happen and we're Conservation Law Foundation, so maybe we got a bump because of that. You wanna make sure you give it enough time. So the other one we have here is the one-click donation form and the multi-step form. So we have, which way do we want to do here and how do we go? And so they got a 1% increase in conversion rate from that test. And so that might not be enough for you to change a lot of things across the board, right? I think everybody would kind of have a different opinion. And this is where that hypothesis can be so important, right? If you had kind of stated like, oh, we think that making a switch over from a multi-step to a single-step page is going to lead to at least a 4% increase in transactions, and then you get a 1%, well, what do you do with that 1%, right? It may be something that you want to look at again, explore more again, or maybe something, you know what? We thought it was going to be at least 4. It's not worth it for us to make this shift because we're very confident in how this 1% performs.
I think one of the other things, this might be coming up, but the title of this presentation is talking about testing on a limited budget, but also as a small organization like CLF, you might not be able to reach statistical significance very quickly. So one of the things that we recommended to them is don't try to go for statistical significance on your first go. What you could potentially do, especially with like email testing, is divide up your list 50-50 and do a control versus test that way, and do that over several emails and calculate the results if your audiences are similar between those emails. So say you're doing changing the newsletter format that you send every month. Do 50-50 splits for 6 months to see which one performs better. That way you can get a better baseline of responses versus just trying to get the significance in one hit.
And I think what's important and where CLF has been really successful, since they established a culture of testing, when they end up getting a 1% increase, so that wasn't within their hypothesis testing, that doesn't mean it's a failure, right? That's just a piece of data that they can then go on. I think a lot of places when they start doing testing, and if they were to get a result, like if you got a result like the top, it's very obvious to make the change. Like that's a very straightforward. The bottom one is much harder to know if you should make a change. Well, if you haven't established a culture of testing, if you don't have the leadership buy-in, it can be a lot tougher to keep running tests because they're like, well, you got a 1% change. That's really not worth it to make changes to our pages when we know like they work is what they are. But creating that culture, right, is going to allow you to say, no, we have a culture of testing, right? We're going to be continually doing that kind of work.
And be okay with failing a test every once in a while.
Right. You should be failing tests probably pretty routinely, I would say, if you're setting your hypothesis up right. Once you've maybe gotten some of the baseline testing kind of out of the way.
Yeah.
All right, so looking ahead into the future for CLF and what are their goals. So what they've really found is they kind of started with that culture of testing in their development shop and the people that really focus around there. And where they're moving now to is to start to expand that into all of their comms because they really want to be less reactive and more data-driven on those pieces. And again, if you start collecting that data, it allows you to make such better and informed decisions when it comes to it. I know they've had a conversation with you, Joe, about some WordPress testing that they want to do. What's that going to look like for them?
A lot of that is based around site architecture and information architecture, so how their navigation works and how some of their copy works. So that's a very it's really kind of not related to donations, but it's more about how people are navigating their site and being able to find the information that they're looking for.
Excellent. So that's it. Thank you so much. We tried to fill in as best we could. And I guess I run my own Q&A, so I will pull up and see if we've gotten anything. Okay, from Anonymous, what A/B testing tool do you use? So I believe they're using split test inside of Engaging Networks. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this really great tool from Google is going away. The one I've been recommending recently for folks is VWO.com. It's, I think, probably the most cost-effective for nonprofits, and they do offer nonprofit discounts, so don't be afraid to contact their salespeople.
Yeah. And from our side, the Engaging Networks platform does have a split test page type built into it. It does some things really well. It does other things not so well, just like any piece of technology. So I know that kind of over the years, people have found it to be very good if you're just trying to do some kind of exactly what Sydney's talking about. That base level of testing where you're like, oh, we're going to change a color. Oh, we're going to change some copy and see what happens from there. All that happens is you get a new link. You insert that link into the donate button, let's say like on your WordPress site, and then it just dynamically sorts people between the pages that you want to test, and you can see what that looks like. The one caveat we always say is build your pages, test your pages, and then start fresh pages for every test. You really, and I mean, that's probably on any platform. You really want to make sure you're clearing your data so that way you know you have a good data set from when you first started.
Can I offer a tip?
Absolutely, that's why you're here.
Yeah. All right. So if anyone's still using Email Classic on Engaging Networks, one of the things that I've learned is if you're doing an A/B test within email, screenshot your results of the 2 different tests before you choose a winner.
Absolutely.
Just to make sure you're capturing that snapshot of what the results were at that time. That's also something that's helpful to add into your testing database.
And that would go, you could link to that in your Trello, you could put it in your Google Sheet. You just want to put it somewhere so you can come back and reference it. It's like, oh yeah, that was what was actually in the platform that we saw, just in case someone had a clerical error when they wrote something down.
Yep.
That's all I saw come in for questions, so thank you so much.
Thank you.